Hey guys, welcome back to Willpower Garage. Today I'm working on a 2015 Audi Q5 with a 2-liter TFSI motor, and I'm going to show you how to replace a fuel injector when yours has gone bad. I've narrowed my misfire in this thing down to what I think is a clogged fuel injector. So I have a misfire in this thing. I moved coils around, I moved plugs around. Misfire still stays in that cylinder. I did put my borescope through the intake manifold to try to check the valves, and the valves are a little carboned up, but I don't think that's the primary issue here. I'm pretty convinced I have a bad fuel injector. So in this video, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to remove the intake manifold so I can get to that injector. I'm going to replace all of them with brand new Bosch fuel injectors just because this is so common. Many of the aftermarket suppliers now sell it as a kit. It comes with gaskets, injectors, the special Teflon seal you need. So it's a pretty nice complete kit. The other thing I'm going to do is, since I have the intake manifold off, is I'm going to clean the intake valves just to make sure there is no carbon deposits on them as well. If you are familiar with the TFSI motors or the FSI motors, you know that they're prone to carbon buildup on the intake valves, and that can cause misfire issues, rough running, poor fuel economy. It just makes sense that I'll have the intake manifold off. I'm going to clean those valves as well. So first things first, what I'm going to do with this thing, you're going to get the engine cover off. We're going to start removing the intake manifold and get our way down so I can remove those fuel injectors. Okay, so looking underneath the plastic engine cover, on the Audi in particular, it's pretty simple to get the intake manifold off. A couple things I want to point out. There is, and I don't know if you could see it here, there is a support bracket that goes from the manifold to the engine block. It's that bolt I'm pointing to now. I know it's hard to see. It is a triple square. You have to remove that so you can get it off. Obviously, we have to remove some of the electrical connections, take the air intake hose off, disconnect our fuel lines here, as well as our evap. And then it's just a couple of T30s that hold this thing on so we can remove this. So I've got the aluminum intake off. I just wanted to go over a few things for the air diverter portion of the intake manifold. There's a few electrical connections you need to remove, but the tricky part here is this really sharp 90 on this breather tube. It is very tricky to get off. You're not going to get the intake manifold off with it like this. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to remove the oil separator. It's fairly easy to do. A lot of times you just have to remove the coils out of the way, and there's a couple of T30s that hold this thing down, and then we should be able to remove it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that now. Now the coils, at least the harness, has a single bolt. It holds that guy on. And then be careful with these clips because they do like to break easily. What I like to do is you push them in as you're prying them away, and you should be able to get them up and out of the way. Get the coils up. And now I can start removing the T30s for that oil separator. Just get some of these bolts out of the way so I don't drop them. There we go. There's that little angle valve, which is, like I said, hard to get off. And now this should just wiggle up and out of the way. Again, a few electrical connections that need to be removed. And in case I didn't mention it, a lot of these connectors have like locks on them. So it's just a matter of prying the grayish white portion away from the top and then just pinching it like normal to slide it off. Get our vacuum hose out of the way. All right. Don't want to lose your air diverters or air guides. I'm not exactly sure what they call them, but I will be removing these anyway when I go to clean off my intake valves. So for now, I'm going to put them in there. All right, now we're down to the fuel rail itself. Like I said, there's two T30s to remove, and we should be able to get the fuel rail up and out of the way. All right, just had to remove the connector for the coolant temp sensor, but there is the fuel injectors. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of carbon deposits on these injectors. This one looks a little cleaner, which makes me think that this guy is leaking, which is another failure point for these fuel injectors. But either way, we're going to replace all of them. Now, I've mentioned it in a couple of other videos you might have seen. I mentioned how I always like to leave these injectors in place if possible. And it's because of this seal right here. I know it looks a little discolored. It's normally white. It is a Teflon seal. Anytime you remove these injectors, you have to replace this seal. It is sealing combustion gases. If you don't, you can have a leak past that injector. The other thing I should point out is these injectors usually get stuck in the port, and I'm surprised all of these pulled out as easily as they did. Happens so often. Audi and Volkswagen have a special tool, which is basically a slide hammer that goes around, and you use that to kind of hammer while pulling to get these injectors out of the port of the cylinder head. So I am actually really pleased that these came out nice and easy, so I don't have to do any of that. Like I said, sometimes they get really stuck. But at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cleaning these valves up so I can get ready to install my new injectors on the fuel rail and get everything back together. All right, before I do that though, I want to give you guys a view of what happens with these valves and why I said that it's very common for these things to get backed up with carbon deposits. And I know it's really hard to see on the camera here. I'll try to focus in a little bit. But those two dark, greasy, oily, dirty circles there are the intake valves, and that is carbon buildup. It's on every single one. Some are worse than others. And you can see that a little bit. This one here, for some reason, is actually dry, but you can see the carbon buildup on that thing. It's on all of them. And what this does is it acts like a restriction to airflow, and the injectors in the cylinder, it's going to inject the same amount of fuel as it normally would, but you're not going to have enough air. So you're basically going to have a rich condition, and it's going to cause a misfire. So unfortunately for these things, it's almost like a maintenance issue where you have to get in here and you have to clean these valves off. And it's all because of the oil separator here is taking the oil vapors, running it right into the intake manifold so the engine can reburn it. No fuel injector behind the intake valve. You have no washing action, so the oil deposits just keep building up. So like I said, I'm going to take all my air diverters, I'm going to clean these up really well, and then I'm going to get in here with basically manual tools. I'm going to use scrapers, I'm going to use some wire brushes and clean these up with brake cleaner and get them to be nice and clean again, ports included. If you guys do want to see a video of, the before and after of this, I do have a video that I did this on a VR6 and a Porsche Cayenne. It's not very detailed where I'm showing you me cleaning the valves, but it goes through the procedure basically and what the before and after looks like. Alright guys, so I'm in the middle of scraping these things up, and I am so surprised at how much carbon is on here. It is so rock hard. It's probably one of the hardest I've ever tried to get off. You can kind of see in there, all this so far is what I've been scraping out. And that is all carbon deposit. This little spot here is just now finally starting to show the valve. The other valve here, I mean, it's so much. I mean, that is a lot. That valve should be shiny like the stem itself, and it is not. So I just wanted to show you guys this. Just, I figured the picture alone didn't do it any justice, but to actually see the amount of carbon that came off of that is unreal. So I'll be sure to take a picture of what it looks like when I'm done cleaning these things up. All right, guys. So I got my valves clean here. I know it doesn't do any justification looking through a camera. They still look kind of hard to tell the difference, at least me looking into the camera right now. I could tell you it's hard to tell the difference, but I promise you they are now down to the metal again. And this has got to be the worst set of valves I've ever seen. That carbon was like diamond. I could not scrape it off. It took a lot of soaking and a lot of scraping. As a matter of fact, I'm now filming probably 2 days later from when I started this process. But I just wanted to show you guys, or hopefully try to show you guys the difference in a clean valve from a dirty valve. But I think because of this and the fact that I do these so often, I might finally invest in a walnut media for my sandblaster and maybe make up something similar to like what 034 Motorsport sells, where it goes over the port so you can connect your vacuum, and then you get in there with the media blasting tool to shoot crushed walnut shells around there to break up that carbon. But now that that's clean, what I'm going to do is, before I forget, I also have my air dividers here that are all nice and clean. And I always forget which direction he's going, but let's try this way. There we go. They're all nice and clean now. I'm going to put them into place so I don't forget to afterwards. Should have one more up here. There you go. And aside from the up and down, the side with the little tab sticking out faces towards the intake manifold. But now I've got nice clean valves, clean air dividers here. I'm now ready to put my new fuel injectors onto my fuel rail and get them into place. All right, guys, so first things first, I need to replace, or at least remove, these injectors from the fuel rail. And since I'm replacing them with new injectors that have new O-rings and everything, I'm not too worried about damaging the O-ring seal, but I like to spray a little lubricant in there to make getting those O-rings loose. But basically just kind of prying them up to get the old fuel injector out of here. And it's nothing more than just the O-ring that's currently holding it into place. So just a little bit of lubricant and a pry bar, and we'll get this guy loose. All right, there's all 4 injectors. Let me clean up the fuel rail here. So here's my replacement Bosch injector. As you can see, it comes with the O-ring and the little plastic retainer already installed on the fuel rail end. The only thing we need then is the clip here that holds it on. And you could buy the fuel injecting installation kit, and they come individually. Comes with the little retainer here that's going to go on the base of the injector. It comes with the Teflon seal that I mentioned before you need to replace anytime you remove this injector. And it also comes with the O-ring and the little plastic backer here for the O-ring, as well as this little, I don't even know what to call it. It's almost like another dust seal that gets installed on this side of the injector, and it clips onto a little machine ridge here on the fuel injector itself. So it's worth getting the kit. It's not terribly expensive, but after doing all this work, you probably want to make sure that everything is going to stay into place very easily, I guess I should say. A couple other things. If you want to reuse the metal clip here, although, you know, like I said, if you're going to replace an ejector, just buy the kit. In case you don't, it really just slips onto here. There's nothing that's really retaining it, so that can be reused. If you're taking the injectors apart and, you know, just replacing your Teflon seal, maybe trying the cleaning, you know, just replacing the O-rings. It's pretty easy to do just that. Since I'm using a new injector and I already have the clip, like I said, it's just as simple as that. I do like to put a little bit of silicone grease on the O-ring, and that's to help guide it into the fuel rail here without rolling over or tearing the O-ring. But for right now, all I need to do is put this clip on. I have my O-rings on there, and just make sure that this guy goes in nice and straight without the O-ring folding over in any kind of funky way. So again, metal clip just slips on. A little bit of silicone grease. You can use Vaseline just the same. You can use motor oil. You just, you know, want something on that O-ring so that, again, it just goes into the fuel rail nice and easy. So a little bit of wiggle, get it into place, and that's basically it. All right, so all my injectors are onto the fuel rail. Now I can carefully remove the little protecting caps here. From here, we need to be very careful with this. You don't want to damage the engine, the fuel injector, or that Teflon seal. But I do need to install these little clip retainers here, and they just snap right onto that machine groove at the base of the injector. Just make sure you get all these into place. Be careful of that Teflon seal. That's basically it. You don't want to put anything on this Teflon seal, but we are going to install this into the cylinder head now. As is, we're going to make sure that this thing goes in nice and straight and even, and that way we know that we have a good seal and everything is good. I made sure all my holes here where the fuel injectors go in is nice and clean. No dirt, no debris, no burrs, nothing like that. But I'm going to carefully install this thing. Again, being very mindful of the end of the fuel injector. And just guide these things in nice and easy. Now these are new Teflon seals, so they are going to be a little bit difficult to get into place. And Audi and Volkswagen both have a special tool for this. I don't have it. So that's why I'm going to rely on these bolts here to guide this thing in nice and easily. So I have my 2 bolts here. And I'm going to do this by hand, because I want to be able to watch what's happening as they go down. Making sure my harness connectors aren't going to hit anything funny. But most of all, I just want to make sure this is going down nice and even. So a little bit back and forth. All right. So that's it for the injector install there. Now I can start getting ready to get my intake manifold back into place and move on from there. All right, I can now install the air flap portion of the manifold. I don't know what this thing's called exactly, but it goes on pretty straightforward like. Just line up the lower tubes there. Make sure you have new gaskets on. And then I like to reach my hand back here to get the flaps out of the way. And then make sure it's down all the way. Make sure it's not binding on anything before you go fully installing that. Now the other thing is I removed the brass fitting for the fuel line to get this thing off and into place. So before I go any further, I'm going to put this back on and tighten it. Again, make sure things are not in the way, they're not in any kind of funny place. Your harness clips for your fuel injector do go against the tubes for this lower unit here. Get my air valve position sensor plugged in here because this is also in a difficult spot to reach. Make sure the lock is back in place so it doesn't come off. And since I'm here right away, while I can move both of these around and put a little bit of silicone grease on there for my breather. You can see my oil separator still loose. So putting the upper portion of the manifold on is a little tricky. The support bracket needs to go down and past all the wiring. And then you need to make sure that the fuel rail, fuel supply line makes it to the high pressure fuel pump, as well as onto the fuel rail itself, which is why I pointed out before that fitting that I needed to reinstall and tighten. So before I start putting any of these bolts on, I'm going to get this lower nut and fuel line into the fuel rail at least started. It makes getting it on much easier because it is in a difficult spot. Can't really see it very well. All right, I suggest you get both these lines started before you tighten them down. Again, the intake's loose, so I can get in there with a wrench and tighten it, because it's not in the easiest of spots to be able to tighten that line down. And since these are hard lines, they don't move around too easily. Get my intake manifold bolts into place. Has one. This guy. Again, I'm going to tighten these things down nice and easy, nice and even. Right now I'm just using the gun just to sort of run them down. Get my fuel line clamp back on. And one of the harder things is to get the 10mm nuts onto the corners where the studs come out. A couple different ways you could do it. You can put a little grease in a socket and then put the nut in, and it'll kind of hold the nut carefully so you can get it into place. I've used magnets that are strong enough to hold the nut so you can get it onto the stud and then turn the magnet to get it to thread on lightly. But it's really a matter of what works best for you. This back one here is the most trickiest. All right, so a few more things I need to do to this. Before I keep moving forward with connectors, I have all my bolts run down now. I'm going to tighten them up. First 3 Newton meters, and then tighten down an additional 9 Newton meters. That goes the same for the 10mm that is below. Then I also need to tighten down the support bracket bolt there, the triple square bolt. I'm going to get my electrical connectors mounted back into the harness bracket here and basically start reconnecting all my purge solenoid, my fuel lines here, make sure all my connections are in place. Basically start getting this thing back together. Okay guys, as you can see, I've got the intake manifold all back on. A couple of things I wanted to point out. What I believe is a fuel injector underneath the intake manifold. There is a connector for that. Don't forget to plug that in. The other one I didn't mention is the coolant temp sensor, which is also in this area. Make sure that goes back into place, as well as the solenoid valve here has an electrical connector for the changeover valve for the intake manifold. Other than that, it's, you know, a pretty straightforward procedure from there. You're just going to put stuff back where it came off. Make sure all your hoses are tight, your intake plenum hoses and everything like that. Since I did clean the valves on this thing, I'm not going to be terribly surprised when there's a nice cloud coming out of the exhaust. That's basically just all the carbon that I knocked loose on this thing. But from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the check engine light, start this thing up, and make sure it runs well. But as you can see, replacing an injector on one of these is a pretty straightforward, easy repair. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. As you can see, replacing a fuel injector on your Audi is pretty simple. This holds true for Audis and Volkswagens alike. Not a lot to do, a lot to take off to get to that point, but pretty straightforward. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop me a comment below. I'll answer them as fast as I can. And if you guys can give this video a like, a share, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Really helps me out. So, as always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.